Before we go forward, we need to take a bit of a detour to touch upon the experiment that came to the series. We'll be taking a lighter touch to these next two, primarily focusing on what happened and, more to the point, why the series was left in the state that it was in. For this, we need to back to when Aliens had been such a huge splash. A comic book adaptation of the original 1979 Alien film had come out, but due to its visceral nature, it had been released by Heavy Metal rather than any of the mainstream comic companies. And when the time came for Aliens to be made, a comic book adaptation was created by Dark Horse Comics, who started with a mini-series using the Aliens property. Notably, they had Hicks and Newt in them, only for them, after Alien 3 came out, to retcon them as being two different people. It wasn't long after they started Aliens that they acquired a license for Predator, and created their first miniseries, Concrete Jungle, likely the result of conversations with 20th Century Fox about the plans for Predator 2, as both brought the alien hunter to urban environments. It was in Dark Horse Comics Presents number 34 that a short story revealed an alien queen in bondage. And in issue 35, a short story with the two unseen humans who were narrating during the previous part, not continuing their conversation from that story, while we see the interior dynamics among the predators. And finally, in issue number 36, the moment when eggs are dropped onto a planet so that xenomorphs might emerge for the predators to hunt. The idea of this emerged from a discussion of a crossover with DC Comics, when the idea was suggested that they should just do a crossover with properties they already had. That way, there was no need for coordination with an outside creative team. The concept made a great deal of sense, really. The xenomorph is labeled by Ash as a perfect organism, and thus hunting the perfect organism would be the greatest challenge that a race of hunters could undertake. The story finished by promising it would continue in issue 1 of Aliens vs. Predator. The 3-part story was collected and released as issue number 0 of that miniseries. The title, it should be noted, was plural of the former, but singular of the latter, because Dark Horse Comics' license was for the Aliens property, not the Alien property, and similarly, the Predator property. This would lead to an inconsistency for the property. Sometimes it was the singular Alien versus Predator, and sometimes it was the plural Aliens versus Predator. This 4-issue series had the Predators seed a planet with eggs, unaware that since the last time they had done this, humans had established a colony on that world, ranching livestock. The aliens are rapidly establishing themselves, while the Predators are just as content to hunt the humans as the aliens. However, one of the Predators is badly injured, and a human doctor treats him. In gratitude, the Predator intervenes when its fellows try to kill the doctor, killing them instead. Together with the humans, the Predator is able to eliminate the aliens, though is mortally wounded by the alien queen first. The body is collected, and the Predators show respect to the human leader who had fought alongside the hunter, who is the only one that doesn't abandon the planet, hoping that there will be another hunt someday. And oh yes, there definitely was. The success of the original Aliens vs. Predator crossover naturally prompted more of them, and impressively without diminishing returns. But most notably, 20th Century Fox was paying attention. Predator 2 included a xenomorph skull among the visible trophies as an Easter egg. Jim Thomas, co-writer of Predator 2, proposed an actual film about such a crossover, and Fox was intrigued enough that when Peter Briggs wrote a script, they explored having Roland Emmerich direct, who was wrapping up work on Universal Soldier at the time. But things stalled, and he went off to make a little film called Stargate instead. The script was considered strong, but Fox was trying to get Alien 3 made after years of struggling and put Alien vs. Predator on the back burner. It was again considered after Alien 3's less than successful run, but they went with Alien Resurrection, to Sigourney Weaver's relief. She thought the idea of it sounded awful. However, during those years, the Dark Horse comics did very well, And in 1993 came the leap to video games with Alien vs. Predator for the Super NES and Alien vs. Predator: The Last of His Clan for Game Boy. The following year, a first-person shooter for the Atari Jaguar came out, as well as a Capcom arcade beat-em-up. This crossover wasn't an anomaly. It was spreading well beyond the bounds of comic books. Perhaps most impressive was that Aliens vs. Predator entered the glut of 90s card games, trying to hop on the Magic the Gathering bandwagon. These ranged from highly effective competition, like Star Wars, to shockingly awful, like Doctor Who. Aliens vs. Predator actually emerged as one of the more acclaimed licensed card games of that time, offering a unique 3-player game option. The Alien faction relied on numbers, the Predators on stealth and advanced technology, and for the third, Colonial Marines were added that emphasized technology and teamwork. An expansion tied into Resurrection came out the following year, introducing new mechanics, but what complicated things was that there were photos used on the cards. Now, this was fine in most cases, but it was clearing the rights to likenesses of actors that was an issue. The game failed despite its acclaim, though fans kept the game going, and 10 years ago, the entire game was given an unofficial recreation on Steam with the Tabletop Workshop. PC games continued to get made, comics came out to continue to claim, and Fox started to think maybe they'd been missing an opportunity that had fallen into their laps. As mentioned, James Cameron and Ridley Scott had an informal agreement that they would make Alien 5 together. Getting in the way of that seemed like insanity. Scott had put out Gladiator, Hannibal, and Black Hawk Down in the previous 2 years alone, and Cameron's Titanic had been the first billion-dollar film. But weighed against that was the support for this crossover film. With the ironic failure of Resurrection to revitalize the Alien series, and Predator not having had a film in over 10 years, Fox had two properties on life support. While there were times when they would solo in other media, for the most part it was the dynamic between the two that it was winning fans and making money. Additionally, after Briggs left the Alien vs. Predator project, he became involved in a long-running attempt to make a different crossover between Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, taking over for, I kid you not, Brannon Braga and Ron Moore of Star Trek, who had collaborated on the project. That Freddy vs. Jason was finally ready with the script and director further encouraged Fox, as New Line Cinema was getting a chance to revitalize two franchises with one film. The idea of doing the same was enough to justify turning down Cameron's plan, which horrified him. He said, "This is going to destroy it. You're going down the Frankenstein meets the Wolfman path," the universal crossover which many felt was the point when the monster films began to deteriorate. Perhaps as an inside joke, the final film would feature footage from that very movie playing on TV. The first script considered was by James DeMonaco, who would go on to kick off the Purge series, but at this time was known for the successful Samuel L. Jackson, Kevin Spacey thriller The Negotiator, written with Kevin Fox. The two turned in a script involving scientists who used xenomorph eggs to create the monsters on Earth in the hopes of luring the predator species here to hunt them and then ambush the aliens for their advanced technology. This didn't impress, though, and was quickly shelved, especially when something far more promising came along. It was after the successful release of the first Resident Evil film that its director, Paul W.S. Anderson, was approached by John Davis, the very prolific producer who gave us everything from the Grisham adaptation The Firm to the infamous Waterworld. He asked if Anderson had any ideas. He mentioned the ongoing problem with Alien vs. Predator in particular, and wondered if Anderson had any ideas on that one, unaware that, in fact, Anderson had been sort of dream projecting that since even before the breakout success with Mortal Kombat. It was his enthusiasm that gave Fox the confidence to pivot to a crossover. But the problem was that they weren't the only ones needing convincing. Brandywine has contractual producer participation in any Alien-branded theatrical film, and Davis Entertainment has the same for any Predator-branded film. While Fox owned the rights, they needed to get those two on board as well. Now, of course, Davis was already signed on for it, but Brandywine was less than thrilled by the idea. Finally, though, they were willing to go along with it since it seemed the property was otherwise going to stagnate. Also brought aboard was Mike Richardson, founder of Dark Horse Comics, to serve as a producer. Everything was now in motion to bring the perfect organism and the ultimate hunter together on the big screen. The thing about bringing two properties together is trying to find where they can coexist. It's much easier to bring together Batman and Spider-Man than, say, Luke Skywalker and Godzilla. But even then, you have to establish if Batman is visiting New York or Spider-Man is visiting Gotham City. Or both. Alien is set in the future out in space. Predator is set in our time and on our world. Dark Horse had chosen to thus bring the Predator into Alien's world, far away and in the future. While Anderson wanted to do the opposite, bring the Alien into the Predator's world, and face off in the present in a remote corner of our planet, Antarctica in this case, in order to keep knowledge of events from getting out. Anderson worked on the script for 6 months, having it revised by Shane Salerno. He went back to the original Alien script for ideas, including the pyramid and chariots of the gods stuff, to the point that O'Bannon and Schuss had asked for, and received, story by credit for the film. The script also drew upon elements of the original comic, with predators keeping an alien queen captive in order to produce eggs for the Great Hunt. In this case, the predators taught humans how to build pyramids long ago, and the one found in Antarctica has features of all 3 types of pyramids: Cambodian, Aztec, and Egyptian. And the humans would then accept the honor of being impregnated by the facehuggers in order for the ultimate prey to be born and hunted. The predators would come every 100 years for this hunt, and the humans have stumbled into it. As with the original comic, a human woman would ultimately side with a lone predator against the aliens, the hunter perishing due to mortal wounds, and its peers coming to show her respect.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
What the juxtaposition of the comic plot with this results in, though, is rather problematic. The predators in this adaptation are even more morally dubious than the comic, as they not only have enslaved a creature for the express purpose of hunting her offspring, not only are killing the humans despite the aliens being the reason they're hunting here at all, not only are they bringing life into existence for no other reason than to be able to snuff it out, but they've manipulated humanity to support this crime, though being perfectly fine with killing humans for no reason. Of course, the aliens' de facto mode of killing all others makes coexistence untenable, but it could easily be argued that unlike the heroine in the comic that was trying to protect the people she was responsible for, the one in the film is willing to side with the villains to save herself from slaves that have successfully broken their bonds. The third act feels like it completely ignores the culpability of the predators, and the film shows no empathy for a slave race, even if that race is a threat to humanity. And after all, they never asked for any of this. They never chose this hunt. In any other work, a creature being created solely so it could be hunted and killed would be tragic victim, not the evil that needs to be vanquished. Not to be blind to the threat, humanity would go extinct if they're not stopped. But the film's final act seems to completely forget who is responsible for all of this, who the actual villain of this film really is.
Remember, the lesser of 2 evils is still evil, and the enemy of my enemy is not my friend.
Anderson chose to employ the slow burn approach of the original Alien and Predator before getting to the action. There's an artistic point to be made for this, but essentially, it made the film feel like it was dragging its feet. The standout moment of the movie was giving what the title promised: the fight between the alien nicknamed Grid and the Predator nicknamed Celtic. The complex fight, less than 3.5 minutes of screen time, took a month to film, though the final result was worth it. It became the most talked about scene in the film. The intention was, after the build-up, It'd be an adrenaline rush to the finish. That wasn't what Fox was going to allow, though. Tom Rothman once again got involved in the production, this time with a last-minute demand that outraged Anderson. We're going to make this a PG-13 film. This was completely out of nowhere. None of the previous 6 films had been anything less than an R. This last-minute move was an attempt to widen the scope of viewers at the expense of the film that had actually been shot. It was a sign of lack of confidence, but worse, it undermined the film in its attempt to try to reach a wider audience. All of the money shots of the film were left on the cutting room floor, and Anderson himself was excluded from the process. The now sloppily recut film was not what he'd hoped for, to say the least, and his private screening of the film for his professional colleagues, which included David Fincher, in fact, turned into every Hollywood creative's personal hell. It wasn't long before the respectful silence turned to mutterings, then to clear sounds of disapproval. When the Predator removes his mask, someone quoted Evil Dead's Ash, shouting, "Give me some sugar, baby!" to much laughter. A nightmare. Paul Anderson's passion project had become Mystery Science Theater 3000. Ironically, James Cameron admitted he didn't hate it as much as he feared that he would, ranking it above Alien 3 and Resurrection at least. But the results were mixed to negative with critics, and fans were overall disappointed. Scott Kurtz's PvP comic summed up many fans' views with 30 minutes of greatness wrapped in an hour of suck. Fox had box office returns to justify a sequel, yet the brand had been hobbled by the interference, underwhelming the public and disappointing people who had expected so much more from such a film. Nevertheless, a second crossover film got the green light. The title of the sequel was to be Aliens vs. Predator: Requiem. Yes, while the original was Alien vs. Predator, the sequel was Aliens vs. Predator. The film was scripted by the co-writer of the first film, Salerno, and his early drafts explored different story directions. One of the things the film would have to resolve was the Predalien, as it was called, the chestburster that emerges from the corpse at the end of the last film. The initial draft actually killed the Predalien at the very beginning. The hybrid chestburster that emerged was originally going to mature and die aboard the Predator ship after fighting a few predators. In that version, the ship still crashes on Earth, unleashing the other xenomorphs via facehuggers, but the Predalien itself would not have been the primary antagonist on Earth. This was later changed so that the Predalien survives as the main villain, as it was felt a Predator-Alien hybrid was a fresh element. They even gave it a grisly new reproduction method of implanting embryos in human hosts. The core premise was a contained outbreak. A Predator ship crash lands in a small Colorado town, releasing xenomorphs and the Predalien, and a lone veteran Predator comes to eradicate them. This setting was consciously chosen to evoke a 1950s monster flick formula. Supernatural menace befalls a small town, forcing survivors to band together. They felt this could make the stakes large enough to matter, an entire town being overrun, while being small enough to plausibly have a cover-up, to prevent continuity issues with the Alien films that are set in the future. But even those making the film weren't sold on this idea. It doesn't take much to see that Requiem was a cynical attempt to wring the last few dollars out of the franchise after the missteps of the past film. The budget was a meager $40 million, a third less than Alien 3's had been a decade and a half earlier, not even adjusting for inflation. Fox mandated setting the film on Earth to keep the costs down, and in a belief that it would make the film accessible. But the filmmakers believed this was a huge mistake, that the fans wanted a more futuristic setting. There was something that was obviously missing here, they noted. The Colonial Marines. The first 2 games of Alien vs. Predator were about the monsters, but after that, every game without exception included Colonial Marines in the game in one way or another. They were a fixture of this crossover franchise that only stopped when the original AVP film came out, and the game adaptation of the film wouldn't make sense to have them, since the film is contemporary. It was like Captain America and the Avengers. No, he was not present with them at the very start, but he brings so many things to the Avengers that he's become an integral part of the property. It's hard to imagine not having a Captain America connected to an Avengers project. The Colonial Marines add a vital element to their dynamic because they provide a yardstick to measure the two against. These are both apex species, titans, and the badass Colonial Marines provide them with a more impressive representation of humanity than a linguist or a mountain climber. They give humans a fighting chance without diminishing the stars of the show in the process. But despite it being so obvious that this could give the property the thing that it was missing, Fox was unmoved. Liam O'Donnell, co-producer and consultant, said they were, quote, dealing with a narrative they knew wasn't what the fans really wanted. But they were stuck with it, so they had to try to make it work. Multiple concepts were explored and later dropped. One early script included a town meeting and more backstory for characters, but these were trimmed for pacing. There had been an extended subplot featuring two young siblings, Kendra and Curtis, who joined the survivors, but this was excised as well, as it was felt having two prominent children survive only to die in the nuclear finale would be too bleak even for this movie. The final film toned down the child killing compared to what was in the script, but the one who had a chestburster made it all the way through to the final film. Lucky us. Other things cut for budget was a post-credits scene that would leap forward in time. After Ms. Yutani receives the recovered Predator plasma pistol, the weapon would trigger a transition to the Weyland-Yutani logo on a spacecraft in the future. The scene would then cut to the Xenomorph homeworld, where a tribe of predators hunts a massive winged king alien. The idea was that the Predator technology enabled humanity to develop faster than light travel, bridging the timeline to the original Alien, Weyland-Yutani's Rise, and optimistically setting up a third AVP film in a futuristic off-world setting. Instead, Ms. Yutani said the Predator weapon is not for our world and left the connection implied. The final shooting script for Requiem was locked in by mid-2006, and despite these trims and changes, it delivered an R rating, no PG-13 fumbling this time. Greg Strauss noted Fox had learned that while the first film had made money, it, quote, didn't resonate solidly with the fans, and tried to entice those fans back by upping the ante, even as they slashed the budget. One executive, who wished not to be named, said it was intended to give them, quote, the grudge match in the gutter they've been waiting for. They expected a financial success and at least being embraced by the series fans, if not by the critics. What they got was disappointing. Oh yes, the critics were vicious. But the returns weren't what they'd hoped for, and worse, the film had utterly failed to win back the trust of the core audience, which had been the intent. The admission was they thought the problem had been the PG-13 denied people gore, when what it denied were pieces of the scaffolding that film had been built upon, which undermined it. They essentially then tried to make a film by putting all the nuts and bolts prominent without doing much with them. They tried to make the film by adherence to boardroom criteria, far separated from those who would actually be making the film or watching the film. As far as the fans are concerned these days, the villains of Requiem are the suits who made the filmmaker's job impossible. Inside Fox, the plans for a third film were scrapped, and the Alien vs. Predator experiment was written off as a cinematic failure. Clearly, they had fundamentally misunderstood the appeal of the crossover and how to deliver upon it. Instead of reinvigorating two franchises, they'd only diminished them. The plan for the next AVP film to be a prequel leading directly to Alien would never be developed. However, it seemed that someone else was actually thinking very hard about an entirely different approach to making that film's prequel.
All hail